All right, everyone, welcome to our Foresight Forum for September. We're excited to have you with us today. We are going to be talking about sustainability strategy by department. So if you happened in the wrong webinar, we apologize. You're welcome to jump off, but we're excited that you joined us. Maybe you'll be excited to stay as well. For those of you who have joined us in the past, this will be familiar to you, but for those that are new, this is typically a 45-minute webinar. This is conversational style, so we engage just in general conversations back and forth between our participants. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A box, and you're welcome. This is a little bit different style for us this time around. We're doing a true webinar version versus being in our studio because we have a special guest with us. So don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll address those at the end. And we will stay on to address all of the questions, but we totally understand if you've got to jump off. You're free and welcome to do that. And then we will email the entire webinar and content to you in case you need to catch up with some of those questions at the end.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there is in this both a Q&A box and a chat box. We'll be monitoring both, but if you have a question specifically that you want asked as we're going along, we have someone that's monitoring that, and if they can answer it real quick, they will. Or one of the panelists will try to chime in. And like Wendy said, if we don't get to it during the 45 minutes, we'll make sure to run through all of them before we jump off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Danny. All right, so jumping in, I'm Wendy Schlett, Managing Director here at Foresight. You've been with us for a bit. You've seen me on other webinars. Glad to be here again. I handle a lot of business development and support organizational and product level sustainability. Love to introduce Danny McGee.
Yeah, so I'm Danny McGee. I'm Vice President of Innovation at Foresight. My job is to kind of connect the dots across all of our services and look at how we can use overlapping services and skills to better serve our clients. And I'll throw it over to our guest, Lisa. I'm so excited to have her here. Both Wendy and I have had chances to work with Lisa on past projects, and I think that everybody here will definitely benefit from hearing some of the experiences and career path that she's had in this space. Lisa, do you want to?
Hi, everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Danny. And happy to be here with you all. I'm Lisa Bruni McDermott. I'm the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at H&I. So I run enterprise-wide sustainability activities as well as traditional environmental health and safety for the organization. If you're not familiar with H&I, we're an office furniture manufacturer as well as a manufacturer of fireplaces and stoves. I have over 15 years experience in environmental compliance and sustainability in either the public, private, or consulting sector. So I think I've learned a lot, failed, succeeded, and happy to share any of those insights with you.
Oh, we're so excited to have you with us. Thanks, Lisa. Now, just to let you know a little bit for those, especially for those that are new to our webinar, want to just share a little bit about who Foresight is. I want you to think of us as your outsourced sustainability partner. We're here to support you and your organization, whether that's a single project or taking on some of those consistent data needs that may be taking you away from some of the more value-added efforts that you can support within your organization. Our approach to sustainability is very holistic in nature. We typically approach sustainability and energy management from three main buckets, which is organization. So think of this, everything related to your policies, governance, management systems. We also support the building envelope and efforts associated with that building envelope that your organization occupies. And then also supporting sustainability initiatives around the products that you manufacture. So that's our holistic approach to sustainability as it relates to manufacturing in particular. Some of the clients that we serve run the gamut. But you'll notice that majority of all of these clients are manufacturing in nature. So we support both office furniture, we support agriculture, we support pharmaceuticals, aerospace, all industries. Yeah, automotive. Thank you, Danny. All industry sectors in this space. So if you're manufacturing, don't hesitate to reach out. Now, getting into, the crux of today's conversation around how do you get buy-in for sustainability company-wide? Danny, I'm going to throw this question to you.
Yeah, I mean, so last week we talked, or not last week, last webinar. Feels like last month. Sorry, my brain. Last month we talked a lot about with Steve from Perigo.
Absolutely.
About his journey and how he's gotten some of the buy-in and how Perigo came into the sustainability space. And we kind of talked about some of the challenges of those and the lack of education or finding resources or navigating priorities. And I mean, I think today what we kind of want to talk about is like once you start to get some strategy and some buy-in around that, like what does that look like? How does that show up within the company? And so I think just maybe some recap from last month, right? So Steve talked about starting really small, reporting the wins, making sure to make the asks, right? So he put stuff out there, like he put a sustainability report out there. He started to kind of talk about the work that he was doing within the organization. He connected with the customer needs, right? So from a sustainability perspective, he always put it, so his lens too is he came from the sales side, right? And so he was able to very quickly kind of speak to how sustainability was supporting customer needs and was able to kind of connect the dots there and then make a case for investment and continual investment in it. And then, by reporting the wins and continuing to ask what was next, they was able to grow that within the company. And I thought that was like, a great, that's kind of the same arc a lot of our companies go through, right? Is they test the waters, they get some wins, they figure out who their champions are within the organization, and then they kind of build something from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, he was really helping us share the message that, generating, corporate buy-in can be challenging, but there's opportunities. And he was really willing to share those ideas and tips with all of ours. So if you haven't seen that webinar, we recommend it's in our archive. Go ahead and pull that back up, and you're welcome to see how a company can get, if you're a sustainability manager, how you can begin that journey to help generate buy-in, especially around the corporate level. So today we're going to kind of focus in a little bit more, on the practical application of how do you take this across the entire organization. And one of the things that we're starting to see in and around sustainability is that it's not just a space of compliance. So, a lot of companies really focused on environmental compliance, health and safety compliance. But now we're starting to see that change and move into a space of risk management. So how do we address those risks within the organization? And then now I would say, especially in the last 5 years, the opportunities are now moving even beyond risk management and into sustainable development. And so this graphic that you see on your screen right now really helps solidify that or illustrate that aspect to our companies. So we're trying to help them stay a little bit ahead of that line at minimum. And if those companies want to really drive into the space of risk management, we're able to help companies move and continue to pursue that trajectory of sustainability and sustainability initiatives. And so, Lisa, just want to pull you into the conversation here. What are you seeing in and around this space within H&I related to the difference between compliance obligations versus risk management and then sustainability?
I think there definitely is a lot here. And because I come from compliance and have done a lot of work in environmental compliance. So before this, I've done, all our air emissions, wastewater, all that stuff. So because I come from that space, I use a lot of that in developing how we run our system. So I think about it in a very similar way. Like we want to systematize sustainability within H&I. We want to use the learnings from things like ISO 14001 to build our program so that we're developing it in a way that it becomes embedded in how we operate and not just a standalone thing. So I think there is really good overlap from the compliance side of the house, or from the management system side of the house that we can drive in or build up in sustainability. So I think there is great overlap. I mean, I might be biased because my team does manage both, but I think that like you can't have a strong sustainable foundation if you don't have a strong compliant foundation. Like if you're having violations with the EPA and then you're claiming that you're a great corporate citizen, to me that would be a major problem. So I think that foundation is extremely important in the growth and development of a successful sustainability program. So I think they really go hand in hand, and I think thinking about them in a systematized process way is really important.
It sounds like you're trying to almost like raise the floor, pull everybody
Yep.
up,
Yep.
and begin to push against that ceiling. So that's great, Lisa. And it also sounds like you're looking at not just reducing impact, but also adding value. So utilizing those systems that you have in place to drive that change going forward.
Yeah, I think from an H&I perspective, like we have not focused on having like a halo product or a halo brand. We are really trying to align sustainability across all of our brands. So we're a family of brands. Some are more high end, some are more direct to consumer. So they vary in their target audience or their target customer. But I think from a sustainability standpoint, we are trying to take this across all of our brands and move everybody into, at least working on these initiatives in a similar fashion, and driving improvement in these areas. I mean, there might be slight nuances based on where they're at on the trajectory of things or based on the demand. Like, my fireplace segment, we are definitely more, looking at when I think about chemicals and, chemical transparency and the work we're doing there, we're looking at it more from a regulatory lens, but there's still a value in understanding full material disclosure or things like that for them that can help them from a regulatory standpoint, even if their customers aren't asking for, disclosures and declare labels. So I think there is definitely a synergy that we've been trying to build, and that movement and positive momentum across.
Yeah, I think like that speaks exactly to the graphic on the screen. Is the idea is that, you build a foundation, you can ride the line on compliance. And we're just always in your instance, you have a whole family of brands, and the compliance for the fireplace versus the furniture looks very different, right?
Yeah.
And so one approach is you take this very bespoke, unsystematized approach where every facility is kind of tackling it in a different manner. And every facility is only riding the line. And I think what, kind of as you explained is like, when you start to move into that risk mitigation, that the risk management space, you're not just doing what's needed, but you're managing what you think is going to come down the line, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And
yes.
What's happening for one brand within the portfolio isn't, this, we don't operate in isolation, right? The PFAS is happening across the country. It's happening in some states more than others, but like it's happening, right? And so a risk management approach takes best practices and systematizes it. And so like, yeah, maybe we have stricter standards in one brand than another, but we're taking a similar approach to managing that. And then that in itself is like, that's when you kind of leverage that into the opportunity standpoint, because now you're doing something that's essentially more effective and more efficient than just doing riding the line. And that's going to translate to investors and customers and all of the rest of the stakeholders in value, right? Because you're operating more holistically. So there's lots of good examples within H&I, and I feel like we could just like sit here on the slide and name all these different ones on that. So it's perfect for that.
Well, and speaking of naming them, so I think, through the course of this conversation today, we're going to get into how do we name those across a lot of different units, or, departments within your organization. One thing that we like to stress over and over, and I know, Danny, this is a big topic that you talk about quite a bit, is sustainability is not just one person's effort. This requires everybody within the organization, the entire team, to be able to come together and help move this needle. So, so a person, within the finance department may have actions. The person within the facilities may have actions. The person within HR may have actions. They might all be different actions, but they're all actions to help the company move into that opportunity space, to be able to drive sustainability going forward. Another one that you often describe, Danny, too, is, and I think we equated this last webinar, is kind of relating it to health. Sustainability is like your personal health. We know we need to do better. We see, the doctors tell us we need to do better. But then actually putting that into practice, it takes sometimes a team, but it also takes a commitment on everybody's individual part. You can have that personal trainer on the side of you saying, go, go, go. And that's kind of where the sustainability manager acts, I guess, or sits within the organization. Lisa, is that something like you feel like you're kind of like the coach within your organization to help them, lift those barbells to, do those reps over and over again and just keep encouraging them to improve?
I don't normally think of myself as a super fit coach, but I think that's right. Yeah. I think that's right. So I do feel like we are the facilitators, the educators, and then the people trying to push people along. But we can't always be the only doer, right? If we're the only doer, then we will fail. So I think it really is about trying to educate the teams on the driver that is most related to the work they do, right? So trying to identify the driver that is going to impact that group. So, we look at the drivers as being investors, customers, regulatory. And then when I work with these different functional groups, whether it be supply chain, brand, product, right? Trying to identify the drivers that they're going to attach to the most, or that are going to allow them to understand why this is so important. Because I think that's really foundational. It's like making sure they understand all the reasons why this is important or needed. And then we can get that buy-in, and then we can get them to start to own some action. But I do think that is really important. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're helping companies make that paradigm, or different departments make that paradigm shift, so that the whole organization can shift as well, to be able to understand what they're doing. And how would you say this, like you are able to align these initiatives with your corporate goals and materiality? Why is it so important to make this alignment between what the initiatives you're defining for the different departments, or helping them organize around, and connect that to corporate?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is fundamentally really it is just the most important thing, right? Like, we want to have our materiality study that says these are the important topics to be driving. We want to have our goals that are saying here's the ambition that we're going to set in these areas, and then what are the activities we're going to have in place in all those different departments to drive those goals, or to start to make progress on those goals. So it's really the layering up there, right, of tying everything together. And if it doesn't feel like it's a part of your value or vision, I think that then you can start to feel some disconnect. So I am lucky that I came into a situation at H&I where our CEO is very supportive. So I didn't have to build that momentum at that level, but I do think we've had to build it at with the educational level across the organization, with all the other leadership, with all the brands, and really develop the process. And just elevate them on kind of, it's nice that the CEO says this is important, but how do we get them to believe this is important? And I think we're still on the journey of tying it into our business practices, right? So we've done, I think, a really good job of creating scorecards and driving improvement and creating positive momentum. But I think if those things are always standalone to your typical business strategy or your typical business goals, then they will always be a sidebar activity and they won't be embedded into how you're allocating resources. Or so I think we're still working to create that to be more seamless, and that is a journey. But I think if you can get them to be aligned and embedded and thought about in the same way, then you're not having to recreate a wheel, or every time you're creating goals, it layers on top of all the work other people are already doing.
Well, that makes so much sense. And that's so helpful to be able to create that synergy and be able to share that message throughout the entire organization. So it's not just sitting in those silo moments.
Yeah, I think yeah, okay. I was trying to remember where this slide sat. And Lisa, you talked about this yesterday, and then we'll talk. I think the next slide is the one where we kind of talk about how the sustainability department supports all these pieces. Basically the first step is to translate that sustainability isn't essentially an extra nice to have that these products are doing for a couple customers who are asking this, right? Like that. Yep. It's embedded into who you are as a company because it is now part of the value that you're offering, right? I'm not offering just a product, I'm offering a sustainable product, right? And the people who are buying the product, investing in the product, and regulating that product all kind of care about that. And so, maybe you can speak, because we'll talk about like how this translates into goals and all this stuff, but like, how you've gone around that communication within the company.
Sure. So we created a matrix actually so when I started, we already had goals and they were felt pretty lofty, ambitious. We didn't really have a plan to execute on those goals. So when I started meeting with teams, it felt a little like, okay, but why? Like, why are we doing this? Like, and not in a bad way, but just we've got a lot of other stuff to do. Why is this as important as all the other stuff I have on my plate? So I think creating that matrix of explaining each of our goals and what the driver is, is this coming because of regulations? Are we trying to stay ahead of regulations? Are we trying to drive this because of an investor perspective? Like, and sharing that with people, I think really helped us to just elevate the place where we were operating from and bring everybody to a starting place that was a little bit equalized, right? Because we didn't always have to re-explain that every time. So I think that made a huge impact when we could explain our goals in that way and start to show the value in these different areas. Like, here's our investor ratings and rankings. Here's what they're looking for. We're being judged on this. Two of our biggest investors are BlackRock and Vanguard. They're meeting with us and they want to know about what we're doing on climate change. So that position was really clear. Our customers, we have demands coming where they don't want to list our product in certain catalogs unless it meets certain things. So that demand became really clear. So I think we could represent that in just a clearer, more tangible sense to people and put dollars aligned to it, or really show that it was important and that it had a value that wasn't just a nice to have.
Yeah.
And Lisa, you talked to us as well about how your organization kind of created that buy-in. So you were receiving all of this, guidance and direction from outside of your organization, like you're describing from Vanguard and BlackRock, and it was very clear. But then you infiltrated that or integrated that within the organization. How did you generate that buy-in? And what did that look like for your organization?
Yeah, so I would say early on, in the early days, we started with a resource plan. Like, what do we need across these different areas? And we had a 3-year resource plan at corporate, but it was not build up corporate team. It was, what resources do we need in supply chain? What resources do we need in product? And then once we had identified either a new resource or an existing resource, we started working with those teams to develop their 3-year sustainability plan. So that way we took the goals and integrated it into a functional sustainability plan with those different departments or functional groups, and laid out a roadmap of what it would look like for them. And then that's what ties into our work stream. So each of these areas has their own sustainability strategy plan that layers up into our corporate goals, that layers up into our overall, direction that we're trying to drive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That sounds like a really interesting summit day.
There you are. It's like we had a whole slide on just that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and maybe just recap. So like, you mentioned, maybe I'll go back too far on this. You mentioned materiality, right? You said it was, and materiality, for those who don't know, and we've done other webinars on this, is essentially kind of what matters to the company, what is material to the company, which essentially is another way of saying like, what is the value that you're creating and impact, what's the impact and value creation that's happening there, right? And where are the areas of focus? And so that helps,
Yeah.
that helps to really define and focus what the sustainability team needs to be experts at, right? Because we'll also go back and say, remember, we just talked about how the sustainability team's not doing it all. We just need to be experts at certain things, right? So now we've decided, okay, these are the things we need to be experts at. Now, how do we empower the rest of the organization to take that expertise and put it into action? Well, first piece of that is like training, right? We got to actually, hey, like biodiversity is a thing, right? Or hey, waste is a thing. These things have value to our customers and our investors and our employees, and they want to know about it. So you need to know about it first so that you can tell them about it, right? So we do that education piece. And then I think one of the amazing pieces about this is like, okay, now we've educated, right? What's the Bloom's hierarchy of learning? Remember, understand, apply, right? Now we need to apply that. And so I think I did have a chance to crash this sustainability day at H&I at least once. And I think it's actually very unique in getting corporate buy-in and corporate application of some of those goals, right? And of some of that understanding that you've just gone through that education process. And Lisa, maybe you can just take a couple minutes and talk us through like this specifically, that sustainability summit day at H&I.
Sure. So this summit that we did was our biggest summit so far. So this was I think it was 2002. And we brought all the different, and I call them functional groups, but I would say it's like departments throughout our organization. I'm talking about supply chain, product, engineering, marketing. That's what I'll call as a functional group, right? So we brought all of the key representatives or people we're working with, like that were identified as points of contacts within those groups together for a day where we were going to talk about the goals that we have, a lot of catchball back and forth on opportunities for improvement. Where do we want to go in the future? We had groups like Foresight there to do some educating, to just talk about what is a carbon goal? Where do we move forward? How do we embed this into things like electrification of our facilities? So I think we had sessions that were really dedicated to educating our teams, exploring ways that we can drive positive change, whether it be in carbon, waste, or energy. And then we had working sessions where we were taking information and trying to lay out the path forward. So we started like this session you see here. We have a member-led idea program, and we did a competition before this event where we were trying to get members from across H&I to submit sustainability ideas. And then we did some racking and stacking of those ideas before we came into this event, and then brought everybody together to figure out like what was a kind of feasibility matrix for these ideas that were presented, like which ones could have the biggest impact? Could they have impact across H&I? And are they feasible? How much is the cost? And then all of this translated into activity that was going to happen throughout the year. So we started like this session in the event was really taking those ground up ideas, ground up member-led information, and how do we incorporate that into our strategy? How do we bring that in and see where the opportunities are?
Oh, what a fantastic summit that you hold. And it sounds like you, if I understand correctly, you hold it like once every 2 years and pull the different groups together to be able to share these ideas and repeat the process.
Yeah, so we try and do it on a regular basis. I would say even on the off years when we're not doing this, our goal work stream planning process is all collaborative, right? So I'll take the scorecard and make recommendations, and then I give it back to the team, and we have a back and forth, like to see, because I want to make sure we're pushing, but we're also achievable and we're realistic and we have the resources. So a lot of it is a back and forth and collaborative process with the team. Like right now, we are working we have some goals that are sunsetting in 2025. So we're trying to propose new goals. And I've been doing that process now with each of our segments. and then trying to get their buy-in for the goals, trying to make sure we feel like we're confident that, it's ambitious but achievable. Because I do think that's been a transition, right? Like we talked about this a little yesterday, like goals initially were just ambitious goals. It didn't matter if you achieved them, where I think there's a different level of scrutiny now on them, that like even for us to propose them, like because of the attention we're getting here, we want to make sure that we need it to be hard enough to be meaningful, but also not so overly impossible that it's going to just be all
Well,
based on dependent on new technology. Yeah.
yeah, well, but I also think, we talked about this the other day when we were preparing for this. The question has changed. Before,
Mhm.
the sustainability team was, an experts in these topic areas, and the question was, what is the most sustainable goal that we should achieve, that we should pursue in any of these pieces? And now the question is, what are the goals that serve our the entire stakeholder, right? And
Yeah.
that's investors, that's our customers, that's our client, that's our employees. And inherently, that's going to change the answer that we're going to give, right? And so, I think that it is entirely fair that you see these goals evolve. They've become broader. They may be not as aggressive or progressive as they might have been 10 years ago, but they are, they are they involve more people, and they are actually
Yeah.
people who are making progress on them. So it's just a different
I think
Like,
exercise.
and I think the way you said that to me, that's a level of maturity. Like, I think we're
Right,
getting more mature. Like,
right.
now when I'm proposing goals with a stepping stone pathway. So, like, to get to this goal, we're gonna, for chemical transparency, we're gonna do regulatory compliance first. Then we're going to do attestations. Then we're going to do 1,000 level ppm disclosure. Then we're going to do 100 ppm disclosure. So I've created a roadmap for achievement. I'm not just saying we're going to get this to 100%. And I think there's an evolution of like even how much better we've been getting, or how much information now we have to be able to set a goal that has a pathway versus just a goal and hoping that we can get there.
I laughed just now because I was like, it's kind of like asking my 6-year-old what he wants to be when he grows up.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? When
yeah.
he's 6, he's like, president, fire truck,
Yeah.
fire truck. Like, and then as he gets older, there creates a lot more definition and a lot more, maybe more reasonable in terms of some of what that actually is going to look like.
So this is starting to get into a space that sounds very, very tactical in nature. In your approach, to be able to, work with the team, develop these scorecards. I think the scorecard is an amazing effort to be able to guide and develop consistent support and guidance for the entire teams. But looking at other tactical strategies and landscapes that we have, like what's happening in and around the department related to sustainability? What are the insights that you're able to give? And that's, kind of like the strategy piece. And then there's the tactical piece, which is the things that you do with those insights. So from what I'm hearing from you, Lisa, you're describing two separate items that you're providing through this scorecard, through that summit day to the unit leaders, and then they're taking that information and getting really granular or more surgical to be able to dive into more specifics to reach those goals. So can what needs to fit into that triangle and be integrated into that scorecard over time? Are there certain tactics and strategies that you employ?
So I think there's some things about this scorecard that like you can brush over and be like, yeah, this looks really great. You have a goal, you have a work stream, right? But I think there's some really key things I'd want to touch on. And one is the language, right? So you see we have buckets, chemical, climate, circularity, operations. It's like we had to create a language that people could identify our goals to and the meaning behind them. So I think that is one huge thing. Like when we're talking outside of sustainability people, it's a huge barrier for us. Is like we speak another language, and how do we translate this language into something that they can connect meaning to or connect with their jobs. So I think those high level topics were one thing that was really important. The other thing here that I want to really highlight is that it's always connecting back to the corporate goal, that highest level goal. So we're never losing sight of that. And then we tie that tactical work stream, and that work stream changes each year. So we're always elevating and trying to drive new progress that promotes that corporate goal. And you should see, I mean, this is a simplistic version of our scorecard. We have some with a lot of work streams on them because they're more advanced, or they're doing a lot in this area. And I think that's okay. We have to give flexibility to the structure. I also think, like, I would highlight here, we have one of our brands using different strategic deployment tactics. So they're using different formats for their strategic initiatives. And so we've had to format this scorecard into something that makes sense with that. But I think we've had to give that flexibility, because if that's how they're running their business, I don't want this to be something different and separate. So there's been learning, like this has evolved through the process, but I do think this sets a really clear stage to get everybody working in a single direction, and to also make sure we highlight all the effort that's being done here, to understand the resource need, to understand the allocation need. But then this helps in reporting to our CEO. This helps in reporting to our board, because we have a single way of talking about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and now I'd like to maybe focus our attention maybe into some of those more tactical spaces. And I'm thinking about compliance risk. How is this impacting compliance, and how can an H&I or other organization be approaching this through the lens of sustainability?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I won't even pretend to speak into this because Lisa's here. Lisa, I mean, just apart from the bullet points on the screen, like, can you just paint the landscape for compliance? Like, what's their job day to day? What is kind of baseline that they have to be thinking about? And like, from your perspective, this is you, right? I mean, this is your department, is both baseline, but also, hey, by the way, the person sitting next to you's job is to think about what the opportunity is and how to turn that baseline into some increased value. Maybe you gotta speak to that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here for us under compliance and risk that we're working on is, and you have it there, like understanding those emerging regulations with CSRD and California climate and SEC, right? How are those things going to impact us? Are we prepared to meet those demands that are coming at us from a regulatory standpoint? So I think making sure, like, my team in that area spends a lot of time on making sure we have good data. Like, we have yet to do data assurance, but we're working on that for 2025 to be prepared for the regulations. And I think it's an enormous amount of time, and I can't stress it enough. It's like we will not be able to be compliant with these emerging regulations if we don't have good data. So developing systems for managing the data, making sure we have data governance and we understand, the assumptions we're making. So I think that's a huge amount of time in this bucket. And then the other piece about compliance, and I don't know if I'm going off tangent here, but I think in publishing a report and thinking about how we talk about sustainability, I think another piece that I'm really cautious and active on is thinking about greenwashing and working with my marketing teams to make sure that what they're saying is true and validatable. So I think that's another piece that we're really diligent in working in. So there's a lot in this bucket. Yeah.
Yeah. The word that we often recommend is defensible, right? Is like,
yes.
Because that is really the challenge here, is a lot of this stuff is unknown, right? Or we're making estimates, or we're trying to fill in gaps with imperfect data because we need to have a starting point. And so, we know that at that point you can't be 100% accurate, but what you can be is defensible. And we're going back to systematizing things, right? If you have a systematic approach to data, if you have a data governance, policy or methodology around it, you have a way that you can say, hey, this is defensible. This is what we did to get to this answer. And then that's auditable, right? And that's what
Right.
ultimately gets audited in a lot of these cases.
Well, and I
I
like
mean,
what
and
you talked
oh,
about,
sorry.
Lisa, is
Yeah.
around data. So much of the data comes from the facilities. So I'm going to move into the next
You're
slide
moving
that
us
we've
along.
got.
I get it.
Good job.
We
Good
have
job,
5 minutes
Wendy.
left.
Yeah,
We got
yeah.
lots to cover here, guys. So I want to make sure we at least touch on everything. But the data a lot of times comes from the facilities to be able to pull that information out, whether you're talking about water, waste, or energy. So, how is this approach impacting facilities going forward?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how do you guys think of the facilities piece?
So we've put in place systems to help collect our utility data that we're not having people go to invoices, right? We took away that manual labor and helped to put a tool in place to reduce the burden because of how important that data is, right? And then I think from there, once we have the data, we've really focused on doing assessments. Where are opportunities? Where we're understanding and mapping out our waste, mapping out our energy, and then figuring out where we have opportunities. I would say we had the goal first, right? We had a 50% energy intensity goal with no plan on how to achieve it. So we sat in a room with a bunch of engineers, a bunch of facility people, and we came up with a plan that, some of it was pie in the sky, some of it was basic things, but we threw everything at the table, and at least we had a plan to start with of all the ideas that could get us to 50%. Even if they weren't realistic, we at least had some place to start. And now through the assessments and through the studies that we're doing and things like that, we're learning what's feasible, what's practical, what can we actually implement, and what can help to save us money that we can show ROI and gain support on.
Yeah, I think that we have within opportunity feasibility studies and decarbonization studies right there, right? Like we started talking about this in terms of what's foundational, where the opportunity is, kind of striking it back to that original graphic that we had up there. What's in the facility manager's normal day-to-day job that we would expect them to do, some version of audits, waste, energy, building envelope. Well, and building envelope sometimes can go on both sides of that. But, they're managing the resources that is a lot of times compliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Air,
Mm-hmm.
waste, water, those types of things. And then just basic energy, management, making sure you're turning off the lights, those pieces. I think where the opportunity is that these goals we're setting around sustainability type work, maybe it's net zero or 50% reduction by 2030 or 2050, whatever it is, require forward planning and require us to understand exactly what you just said, Lisa, like what's possible, right?
Yeah.
And what's possible today doesn't mean that it's not possible in the future. And also it helps us focus in on what's not, right? Like let's not pay attention to the noise, right? There are some things that we know, like solar is very, very inexpensive now than it was 5-10 years ago, right? And sometimes that is the best option for decarbonizing your electricity, but you only have so much roof space, or your utility doesn't allow you to install it, right? And so, these types of scenarios will kind of are different types of barriers than technology barriers too, right? So.
So I would feel like,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. On that, I just want to add two things really quick, if you don't mind. So I think like we took a stance on solar, like doing a cross corporate feasibility study, right? Like figuring out where it is the best to invest in something that big. The other thing I just wanted to point out, and I hope I didn't lose it in my head. Darn it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I might have lost it, but I do think like uh, there's basic ways that you can tie this in, right? So I have a sustainability manager that works in the facilities, and one thing that I think he has done so well is looking at asset changeovers. So just tying efficiency to when asset age and life is going to end.
Yes.
So that way, like you're tying those processes together.
Yep.
And we can work to get the most efficient thing when our equipment's ending its life, and we know when that's going to happen, and we can plan it.
So that gets into operations and pulling operations into the facility space.
Yep.
And so, we want to have a little bit of opportunity to discuss, what is the space and where does operations connect to facilities? And then also I'd love to connect it to product development, kind of pull those three along together. What do you see, Lisa, in the space of operation and maybe how it connects to product development?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a really big tie in there, and I think there's just a mass amount of opportunity. Like I think that's where when we want to look at new technologies, like for instance, for us, one of our biggest natural gas users is our ovens, right? And for powder coat paint. So, is there a way for us to move to a low temp cure powder coat paint? That would be the only way we can really electrify. So that's where that bridge of operations and product development is going to have to come together when we're looking at innovation, when we're looking at new materials, new solutions. I think those two teams really have to work together to see, can we build the product? Can it meet all our specs? Can it meet all our requirements with this new material?
Yeah, and to your point of that, like actually getting an equipment inventory with ages and efficiencies, right? If you just bought a new oven last week, that's probably not the first thing you're gonna phase out, right? But maybe you have a wash line, for example, that's 20, 30 years old and it's on its last legs and you're repairing it every week. And that it isn't just, hey, maybe I need to go replace this wash line, but facilitating that conversation over to new product development and saying, hey, how big of a wash line do we continue need to have? What other options do we have in this space? And what are you guys already thinking about that you haven't communicated to facilities? Because I'm about to replace this thing.
Yeah, sometimes we are the dot connector, right?
Yes.
Or
yeah.
In that facilitation role, we can bring these various teams together to think about things that maybe they haven't
summit
before.
Day.
Yeah.
What is that again?
Yeah.
No, that's such a great idea. I think the summit, because it gets to one of the points even on this slide, which is like knowing who's driving that strategy, and you're helping to not only connect the dots, but bridge people as well when they think that there's maybe they own something, and yet maybe, if you stand back a little bit further, you want them actually to work together. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to talk about this, so I have some thoughts on the product development side, and I know we do help and are engaged with H&I on some of the product certification type stuff. But how do you guys approach new product development, and how do you consider and embed sustainability in with that process?
Yeah. So I would say we've been working over the last few years to improve and revamp our design for environment process to make sure that we have sustainable considerations embedded into new product design. And even in our hearth side, right? So that's more common on the furniture side where it's part of our BIFMA level standard, you hear about it more. But even on the hearth side, we took those learnings from what Workplace Furnishings has been doing in our furniture brands to hearth to get them to start to build a sustainability process in their product development. And they have they just began that this year, and now we're starting to measure off of success there and where can we keep driving implementation. So they're doing their first life cycle analysis. And then I think that will be another point where we can add more conditions or points of thinking into that process. But I think that is really huge of setting those gates or setting those requirements for product development. And I think that's the piece, Wendy, where you talked about who owns the strategy. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes that's an important question to ask for product of is your product development team determining the sustainability criteria that the product should meet, or is your brand, and figuring out what do we want the product to meet? Because if your product development team is just the executor, we should just be giving them the condition, does it meet this, yes or no, not asking them the question. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to understand who is driving that so that you can set the work correctly for the groups doing the activity.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a key tip there, Lisa. I think we see that in so many different settings across the board. So it's interesting and great to hear that from your perspective. Now, looking at the finance side of what are the opportunities within finance and how can they approach sustainability? How can they integrate and become integrated in all of the different, aspects? How do they remove themselves from the silo? Because so many times I've seen, lots of companies come up with ideas and then they get to the finance department and it gets axed because they're just looking at specific ROIs that may not relate to the company goals per se. So how do you overcome some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are not perfect here by any means, but I would say we've had a lot of conversations on um, how the budget and where the budget should sit, right? So, and I have a meeting coming up with our CFO to talk about this again. So we started this about 4 years ago. We had the conversations like, should it be held at corporate? Should it be held at the segment? But it was basically determined like at this point, we are running each segment sets their budget and they should allocate a portion for sustainability. We didn't dictate that. And now we're questioning, do we move that to a corporate level budget? Do we help to set the strategy on where the most impact is going to happen? And so we're still trying to figure out the best placement there, but I think it is really important to try and get budget allocated in some way so that you're not typically content or you're not contending with the typical ROIs, right?
Right.
Where it's like if your typical is a 4 year, that might be hard to meet for a lot of sustainability projects. Maybe the like quick wins or the easier projects will hit that, but I think it is really important to educate on opportunities or having those discussions with your finance team. The other place too is like we embedded a sustainability checklist or working to embed a sustainability checklist into our expense authorization form. So if you need capital, you have to go through a sustainability questionnaire and checklist to make sure you're putting in the most efficient equipment, you're thinking about waste, you're thinking about energy as a tie-in to get your capital. So I think that's a process that we tried to put in place that ties it to finance. And now with SEC potential regulations, finance is very engaged here. So
It's interesting how they jump to action when something new comes up, isn't it?
well, yeah, and they hear it from KPMG or auditing firms all the time. So they're hearing these words now too,
Right. Yeah. So now, they had been hearing it probably from you for a while, but now that they're from someone on the outside, it's like coalescing around what the actions are going forward. So that's awesome. So, thinking about this too, from the perspective of supply chains, in all internal efforts are within your control. But when you talk about supply chains, how do you begin to influence your supply chains to get the things that you need out of the supply chain to help make this, some of these paradigm shifts that we're talking about?
Yeah, and I would say like prepare yourselves and your supply chain teams because I do think this is a new way of operating within supply chain. Like I think the amount of data and the amount of transparency we are asking for or the amount of information like we're asking for from supply chains in this area is really different. Like so I think we've had a lot of discussions with supply chain on how do you not overburden your suppliers? How do you not exhaust them? And trying to figure out that balance there. But I do think this partnership of either requesting information, trying to understand what your supply chain partners are doing. So we started with using a third-party tool that allows us to like rank our suppliers based on their publicly available information. So we didn't need to go to them and ask them for that information. We're trying to avoid the fatigue that happens there. But I do think there's a reality where this does take a lot of engagement. So, we have supplier summits and things like that where we talk at and bring up the topic of sustainability so they know it's top of mind and trying to integrate into those normal practices. We've also incorporated our sustainability score into the supplier scorecard. So when they're being judged on-time delivery, quality, they also have a column there for sustainability. So we're trying to drive it all together.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what an interesting approach around trying to get data and not just necessarily pull it out of the supply chain, but see what they're disclosing. I think that's a fantastic approach.
I think you're dead on with that comment about be prepared. The supply chain, I think we talk. Companies think about some of the regulation right now is talking about Scope 3 reporting, and I know a number of companies setting on their goals, have gone through that process, and that's just really scratching the surface of what the real question that's being asked here, right, as it relates to supply chain, because ultimately customers and investors aren't asking you to just make sure you have some good friends upstream, right? What they are recognizing is you're only one piece in the chain, right? Maybe you're the last, maybe you're a supplier to a supplier, maybe you're somewhere within the supply chain. We can no longer, companies can no longer just kind of say, well, what I am only what exists within my boundaries, right? We're now being beholden to who we buy from and the products that we are selling. And the supply chain is in some ways, if we just look at it from an emission standpoint, is sometimes 90% of the emissions of the whole product. And the customer doesn't care that you're only 10%. And you're doing all this work within your own boundaries. And ultimately, they care about that other, the whole 100%, right? It's if you buy a pre-made sandwich, you don't want the baker, the bakers could be extolling all of the great stuff about the bread, but like you care about all the stuff in the middle too, right? And so I think this is one of those spaces that it's going to sneak up real fast, right? The demands are there. Just from my role in the innovation space and seeing the companies that are trying to, the startups, and the venture capital that's being poured into this space is really high. So, the more we can embed within the supply chain is great.
Yeah, and I'm going to move us along because we've only got 4 minutes left. We've had such a great conversation here. We could talk for a long time. So I'm going to quickly talk. I know our next slide's on marketing, and some of the strategies and tactics we wanted to just share with everyone is that tell your story, position, look at the position you have in the marketplace and try and identify ways that sustainability can help determine differentiation. To differentiate your product within the market through the lens of sustainability, and become knowledgeable about sustainability so that you can help be that, chief storyteller in this space, whether that's storytelling within each different department, storytelling up to corporate, be able to connect it to things that people identify with, and then integrate sustainability into your brand. So I know Lisa, we would love to get your thoughts on this, but I'm going to move you to the last slide, which is where do we start? What is your best advice for someone who's just starting out in this space and they're identified as the new sustainability manager? It's become their new hat. Where do you start to help integrate this effort?
Yeah, I would say, if you don't have that materiality study, or, if you're thinking about from an ISO perspective, aspects and impacts, understand where you want to focus, right? Starting to come up with ideas for goals, understanding the drivers and the competitive landscape and the regulatory landscape and the investor landscape to inform those goals. Yeah. And then getting that sustainability team set up across your organization that's going to help support you. So really vying and kind of pushing to get people throughout the organization in those functional teams that have ability to make decisions and do work, engaged and involved, and getting them to start identify what their piece of the ownership pie is. And then measure. Yeah. Measure that. Yeah.
Plan, do, check, act.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lisa, for all your insights and your thoughts. We'd love to open it up. I know we've got 2 minutes here. Foresight will stay on for, however many questions we have, but please share your questions. We'll get them answered. For those who do have to leave us, we do understand, and we appreciate your time. It was great to have you join us today. And we'll see you next time.
Next month.
Yes, next month we have another forum. We're going to be talking about understanding the energy market with Mike and Vicky, and 2 great knowledgeable resources in this space. Please pull in your energy market facilitators within your organization. It'd be a great conversation to hear.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any questions.
So any questions? Throw them in the channel, throw them in the chat. Or you're welcome to jump on and share them live.
Maybe you're not, because I don't know if we have that power. As Brian said, maybe we just did such a great job. No one has any questions.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Well, always wonderful chatting with you guys. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much,
Lisa.
Lisa.
It really is fun. You guys are doing really cool work. And if anybody on this, on here wants to learn more, I imagine, Lisa's, I'm gonna volunteer her. She's.
Yes. I love the work I get to do, so I'm happy to always share or just chat about it. I think
Yeah,
we work in a good field in a good space, and um, it can be challenging. So I think the more we can learn from each other, the better.
yeah, for
100%.
sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thanks everyone and have a
Thanks,
great
Lisa.
day.
Bye.
Bye.